how does our premise get applied in the life of a man whose name you know, but probably have never studied? Lot. Well, let's see. Lot was the quintessential ordinary guy. The kind of guy that you tend to skip over. Unremarkable, really. We know more about his wife and her misfortune than we do about him and his life. There's nothing special about him, nothing that makes him an extraordinary man. In many ways, he's just like most of us, and that actually makes him worth examining. Traditionally, we spend a lot of time studying the lives of the extraordinary people of the Bible. People like David, who was both deeply devout and deeply flawed, who passed his flaws on to his children, even to his son, the wisest yet dumbest of men, Solomon. People like Samson, who just couldn't keep his priorities straight. Like Ruth and Naomi, who teach us, as does Saul's son Jonathan, what loyalty looks like, even when it costs us everything. People like Peter, whose passion propelled him at times past his purpose. People like Samuel, who from an early age can hear and obey God's voice even when it's inconvenient. People like Joseph, from whose trial-to-triumph story we learn what all things work together for good truly looks like. People like Jacob, deceitful and dishonest, yet loved of God even before his birth. Despite this, yes, he did indeed suffer because of his actions, but God loved him despite and through his flaws. People like James and John, who didn't see at first and asked for a thing that they didn't grasp the true depth of, so much so that they asked to be on the left and right and ended up the first and last of the 12 to die. Apostolic bookends, as it were. People like Saul of Tarsus, who put his trust in his religion only to be blinded literally by the truth and become something and someone new, with a new name and a new purpose. And of course, Yeshua HaMashiach, Jesus the Christ, the most man of any man and all God, and the ideal in all things. But we need every so often to look at the Bible's regular guys. So if you would bear with me, we're going to take a few minutes to look at Lot. Lot was Abraham's nephew. His uncle, Abraham, was the father of faith. Abraham was a righteous man. Abraham had a relationship with the Most High God. Lot had a relationship with Abraham. He experienced the benefits of his uncle's relationship with God. Note to some of you listening, Grandma's relationship with Jesus doesn't mean that you're okay with him. Mama's God isn't necessarily your God. Just saying. But back to Lot. After a bit of a land dispute, Lot and Abraham parted ways, and Lot, instead of staying relatively close to Abraham, went and pitched his tent near Sodom. I guess it seemed to him like a good idea, but Lot traded righteousness for sin. Never a good idea. Why? Because the nature of sin is such that it promises to satisfy and to please you. But in truth, it only enslaves and dominates you. Lot, though he knew the character of the people of Sodom, picked husbands for his daughters from among them. And that shows us the paradox of sin, which is that we know that it is dangerous and destructive, but we continue in it nonetheless, or we hover close by it, thinking that we can control it. We know that it's bondage, but we still like the taste and the feel, and we think that it has benefits. Lot wanted, even in the midst of pending destruction, to not go too far away from where he felt comfortable. That's because he did not understand that the strength of sin is pride. You see, you think that you can handle it, you can control it, but in fact, it controls you. Thinking that we can control it, get the benefit of it, and avoid the cost of it, we keep messing with it. But it's all a deception. It's all a lie. You see, if you don't hate sin, you'll play with it, but you'll never win. Lot's wife, unable to let it go, turned back, immediately and irrevocably discovering that the wages of sin is death. Later, we see Lot's daughters getting him drunk and sleeping with him in order to get pregnant. Here you see the impact or the legacy of sin, which is that the corruption spreads and infects those around you. Our children take on the culture and the environment that we expose them to. Though the scriptures make clear that Lot lived righteously while in Sodom and was distressed by what he saw while living there, he made no effort to leave, and in the end, his wife and children paid a price. As Dr. Edwin Lewis Cole once said, "A greater sorrow than a man not seeing a need is the man who sees it and does nothing about it. But a still greater sorrow is the man who sees the need and can do something about it, but won't." Looking at Lot and his family, it was and is clear that with sin, there is always a price to pay. And your harvest is the pain and the penalty. What we see on a personal level with Lot is the exact issue that we encounter with the children of Israel throughout the Old Testament. They just won't leave sin alone. They just won't leave it alone. Just like us. Just like us. The hymn writer laments it, "Prone to wander, Lord, I feel it." The Apostle Paul laments that even when he would do good, evil is present, and that the thing that he would do, he doesn't. But the thing that he would not do is what he does. Just like us. This is why Joshua had to declare to God's chosen people, "Choose ye this day whom you will serve." This is why Moses had to declare to God's elect, "See, I lay before you death and life, blessing and cursing. Choose life." Imagine having to be told to choose life, as though there is another choice. But this is because the deception of sin is that it will cause you to despise the things of God. Listen to Numbers chapter 11, verses 1 to 6. Now the people began complaining openly before the Lord about hardship. When the Lord heard, his anger burned, and fire from the Lord blazed among them and consumed the outskirts of the camp. Then the people cried out to Moses, and he prayed to the Lord, and the fire died down. So that place was named Taberah, because the Lord's fire had blazed among them. Contemptible people among them had a strong craving for other food. The Israelites cried again and said, "Who will feed us meat? We remember the free fish we ate in Egypt along with the cucumbers, melons, leeks, onions, and garlics. But now our appetite is gone. There's nothing to look at but this manna." Notice that God calls them contemptible. People who have been delivered by the hand of God, but want their own way. I'll say that again. People who have been delivered by the hand of God, but want their own way. Just like us. The people complained because what God had provided them from his own hand was insufficient for them. But you see, they missed the old days. They missed being Pharaoh's slaves because the food was spicy. Does that sound like us? We look back on our lives before we came to know Christ, sometimes wistfully because it had a flavor that we miss, and too many churches today are trying to accommodate that desire. Or worse yet, we stay where we are, knowing that our actions are sinful, that they offend the Most High God, but because they make us feel good. Be not deceived. God is not mocked. Seeming to reference this very event, the writer of Hebrews says, "For if we go on sinning deliberately after receiving the knowledge of the truth, there no longer remains a sacrifice for sins, but a fearful expectation of judgment and a fury of fire that will consume the adversaries." These people, the children of Israel, were freed slaves, yet their lust caused them to have selective memory loss. They wanted to go back to slavery to appease their bellies. They were out of Egypt, you see, but Egypt wasn't out of them. And because of that, they died without ever reaching the promised land. It is as Harriet Tubman said, "I freed 1,000 slaves. I could have freed 1,000 more, if only they knew that they were slaves."